Wow, I can't believe it's actually here. It's pretty wild, man.
It's 1999, and a CNN camera crew is following a young tech entrepreneur as he takes delivery on a brand new McLaren sports car.
There it is, gentlemen, the fastest car in the world.
Elon Musk is a 28-year-old South African tech mogul with thinning hair and a baby face. He's one of the many big winners of the dot-com boom of the late 90s. He sold his software company to Compaq for a little over $300 million.
Just 3 years ago, I was showering at the Y and sleeping on the office floor. And now, obviously, I've got a $1 million car.
But all that money isn't enough. Musk already has his sights set on his next venture, a financial tech company that one day will become PayPal. But right now, he's calling it X.com.
I think X.com could absolutely be a multi-billion-dollar bonanza. I'd like to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. That'd be cool.
After the world made it through the Y2K crisis, the internet was thriving. On March 10, 2000, investors popped champagne on Wall Street as the market soared on the back of internet startups.
The tear in tech stocks continues. Tech-heavy NASDAQ exploded to, yes, another new record high.
No one knew that in 2 years, the party would be over, and the world would be changed forever. Later that month, a man was sitting on his computer in Hamburg, Germany, using the web to research flight schools in America. "Dear Sir," he wrote in emails, "we are a small group of young men from different Arab countries. We would like to start training for the career of airline professional pilots. In this field, we haven't yet any knowledge, but we are ready to undergo an intensive training program." He sent a similar email to more than 50 different flight schools and made plans to travel to America. A few months later, that man, Mohammed Atta, was staying at a hotel in New York City. He and his associates used the internet in cafes and libraries. They used it to sign up for free web email accounts. They used it to buy airline tickets and coordinate flight times, to make fake social security numbers and obtain driver's licenses. And they enrolled in flight schools around the country. Around the same time, the dot-com financial bubble, long held up by wild investor speculation, finally burst.
It's described as nothing short of breathtaking, a points drop never before seen on the US markets.
The value of internet companies plummeted, taking the markets with them. By late 2000, most internet stocks had declined in value by 75%, wiping out $1.75 trillion in value. Wall Street was reeling. But a far more devastating blow was about to be struck, right on its doorstep. In late August, Mohammed Atta sent what would be a final email to his associates. It reportedly read, "The semester begins in 3 more weeks. We've obtained 19 confirmations for studies in the Faculty of Law, the Faculty of Urban Planning, the Faculty of Fine Arts, and the Faculty of Engineering." The message was in code. Those 19 confirmations referenced Atta and his 18 accomplices. The 4 faculties were code words for their intended targets: the Pentagon, the U.S. Capitol building, and the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The last time anyone heard from Mohammed Atta was the morning of September 11, 2001, when he and his fellow hijackers took control of American Airlines Flight 11.
Nobody move, please. We're going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
Atta turned the plane south toward New York City.
On Tuesday, September 11th, consistent with my just total lack of desire to be at school, I skipped that day.
This is Alex Horton. Today, he's a national security reporter for The Washington Post. But back on September 11th, 2001, he was faking sick to get out of going to high school.
I was up late playing video games, and I had woken up late. I turned on the TV and saw that both the towers were already down by the time I realized what was going on.
Both trade towers have now been attacked and destroyed. with thousands of people in them or in the immediate area adjacent to them.
Horton watched as the scenes unfolded on TV. Images of New York's financial district buried under more than 1 million tons of rubble. Survivors moved through a blinding cloud of white dust. There were scenes from where a plane had hit the Pentagon.
It looks like they are trying to create a fire break to keep the fire from spreading throughout the Pentagon, and it's been spreading.
And from a field in Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 had crashed after passengers and crew heroically thwarted the hijacking.
Never got there. 38 passengers, 7 crew, no survivors. The debris here is spread over.
In all those chaotic images, one thing was clear. This was an organized, coordinated attack. In a later briefing, Ronald Dick, the director of the FBI's cyber threat arm, would tell reporters that the hijackers had used the internet and used it well. The creators of the internet had been right. Its utility was in bringing people together. And in that respect, it was just a tool, powerful in the execution of both good and evil. In the chaos of those first days, more people than ever turned to the internet to get information.
I went to, some message boards just to see what was going on. And, I really liked movies when I was in high school. One of my favorite forums to hang out was Rotten Tomatoes. That was like my source of information back then, the real-time discussion, pre-social media.
In chat rooms, online forums, and instant messages, people everywhere were trying to make sense of what had happened. Blogging was a relatively new medium of online self-publishing. But as people used blogs to search for the missing, as survivors shared their stories, as writers expressed their fear and anger, and experts weighed in directly on the aftermath, blogging was becoming more powerful and important than ever. No longer would people have to depend solely on the news media for answers. In this new era of the internet, they could turn to each other.
There was a couple of chat rooms I belonged to that had like an international crowd, and I had this Australian friend, and I remember telling her, this is our World War II. This is my generation's call to action. And she didn't understand it. She was skeptical of this idea that I'd be in a great place to do anything about what had happened. I grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, so I wasn't really connected to it in any way. I didn't know anyone infected by the attacks, didn't know a single person that it touched directly or indirectly. It was more like, this is an attack on my country that I know I was going to serve, so let's go do the thing.
In the wake of 9/11, America would be led into an unjust and unpopular war.
Last night, a square mile in central Baghdad seemed like hell on earth.
We would invade Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with the attacks on 9/11. And as that war dragged on and the casualties mounted, what happened in Iraq would be twisted by propaganda and obscured by censorship. But out of that repressive environment, a new anti-war movement would galvanize and grow online, driven by blogs that could go around the gatekeepers of what we would all soon call mainstream media. This new era of the internet would put the power of speech in the hands of individuals. The internet, as it had for the 9/11 hijackers, would be used as a crucial tool for organization and coordination. This time for free speech, for protest, and ultimately for change. My name is Garrett Graff, and this is Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet. Episode 2, Establishing Connection. The early 2000s were deeply marked by the terror of the 9/11 attacks. The U.S. government reeled, seeking revenge on America's enemies abroad while simultaneously ratcheting up security at home. Suddenly, there were armed soldiers in shopping malls and airports, and increased government surveillance of American citizens in public places, on the phone, and even online.
There was something about the sense that public space kind of didn't belong to everybody in the way that maybe it had before 9/11. A lot of people used 9/11 as a pretext to put a lot of restrictions on who was able to be in certain places at certain times. And I do think that that was part of what felt powerful about that summer. Back in that moment, like that definitely hung over the whole thing.
Back in the summer of 2003, Bill Wasik was living in New York. He was working at Harper's Magazine and spending more and more time online.
I mean, I was using it a lot. I was reading a lot on the internet. And meanwhile, I had also just become fascinated by the viral email, which sounds so funny now. They would be chain emails that your uncle sent you about how Bill Gates was going to give you a bunch of money. There would be political chain emails, and there would be chain emails about events going on, about parties, about interesting things to do in the city.
And looking at all these chain emails, Wasik had an idea that at the time, believe it or not, was revolutionary.
What if you used a chain email to just gather people?
Could such a thing be possible? Could you use the internet to get a big group of strangers together?
Now that just seems so obvious, but at the time, it just seemed like sort of a funny idea. And I came up with this idea that, okay, I'm going to call it the Mob Project.
If Seinfeld was a show about nothing, the Mob Project was a gathering about nothing.
You know, it's like you have been invited to join Mob, the project that gathers people in New York City for no reason. I think I maybe had 50 people on my original email.
The people on the chain email would be directed to meet at a certain place at a certain time to do a certain weird thing. And then they would quickly disperse.
And that's just it. And everybody's just left to sort of wonder what the hell happened.
Wasik directed the first mob to meet at the top floor of a Macy's, at the rug department.
I did have a little bit of a knot in my stomach as I was going up those like rickety old escalators in Macy's. My nervousness was a little bit of, I hope there are enough people for this not to be embarrassing. And I was very gratified to get up there and realize as people streamed in that people were really into this idea.
About 200 people had showed up and were milling around the usually empty rug department.
People were all supposed to go and stand around a particularly large and expensive rug and contemplate it. The idea was we all live together, possibly in a commune-like situation. And if anybody asked, we collectively were looking for a love rug. I don't know where I came up with that phrase.
Suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge mob of people were interrogating the overwhelmed clerks about the rug.
There's, like a lot of double takes, like a lot of where did all these people come from? A little just bewilderment of just like how this was possible. Then we decide that it's not right for our purposes and we're all just going to leave.
As quickly as they had come, the mob was gone, leaving a lot of confused faces in their wake. It was all in good fun, but Wasik had tapped into an as yet untapped superpower of the internet.
Using the internet to take a social network and make it physical, you didn't have to rely on any sort of traditional media. There were no gatekeepers involved in it. And the power of that idea was, I think, just really, really strong.
Wasik organized a few more of these mob gatherings in New York, and more people were showing up.
There was a blogger on the West Coast who started writing about these events, and I'm pretty sure he was the one who invented the phrase flashmob. And then people started using the phrase to describe what we were doing in New York. Very soon after the first successful flash mob, people started emailing me to say, hey, can I steal your idea in my own city? And my immediate reaction was, this is not much of an idea. You should just take this idea and use it. Very quickly, it wasn't just in New York, it was everywhere.
A brand new phenomenon called flash mobbing uses cell phones, text messaging, and other technologies to organize bizarre stunts.
These certainly happened on every continent. There were hundreds of cities that were doing them just by the end of that summer.
Suddenly, a department store in Toronto was beset by a mob of people hopping around like frogs. A group mobbed a furniture store in the UK looking to buy a couch.
Give Maybe some idea what's going on.
Incidents have been reported across the United States and Europe.
It was clear that this thing had taken on a life of its own.
Back in New York, Way6 mobs were getting bigger and bigger.
In some ways, the craziest one was the one at the big old flagship Toys R Us in Times Square. There was this giant animatronic dinosaur. People were supposed to cower before the giant animatronic dinosaur like it was like a terrible god. People cowered, and they were also they were moaning. It was mayhem.
The look of disbelief on people's faces. You show up and people are like, what is going on?
These mobs were silly and mostly pointless. That was the point. But people were already starting to see how they could be used to advocate for issues.
I would be humbled to see that, in San Francisco, they would do a mob of people applauding people for taking public transit. What I saw in the excitement of people to want to come and see what would happen, it's like turning on that tap of the internet in your life. We were just beginning to learn how exciting what came out of that tap could be.
These apolitical gatherings, powered by the internet, had come at a time of political strife in America. The country was embroiled in military responses to the attacks on 9/11.
Thank you all.
President George W. Bush called it the global war on terror.
Tonight, I want to take a few minutes to discuss a grave threat to peace. The threat comes from Iraq.
Already at war with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Bush set his sights on Iraq, a country with no direct link to the 9/11 attacks. A country, he told the world, that posed an even greater threat.
It possesses and produces chemical and biological weapons. It is seeking nuclear weapons. It has given shelter and support to terrorism and practices terror against its own people.
Major Democratic Party leaders like John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden all got behind the war.
These weapons must be dislodged from Saddam Hussein, or Saddam Hussein must be dislodged from power.
Big media outlets like Fox News, CNN, and the New York Times promoted the Bush administration's assertion that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction.
So what do we know about Saddam's arsenal today, and how dangerous he may be?
The establishment was behind a war that many in the public viewed as unjust and unnecessary, and that encouraged the first big wave of political blogging online. In a time of little mainstream dissent, blogs established themselves as strong anti-war voices, facilitating conversations on online message boards. The internet engaged people far better than television or newspapers ever could. It was only a matter of time before that engagement turned into action. On February 15, 2003, as the decision to invade Iraq loomed, anti-war organizations around the world coordinated via the internet to hold a massive day of protests. Huge crowds took to the streets in cities and towns across 60 countries. 3 million people filled the streets of Rome. Hundreds of thousands mobbed the streets of London, Madrid, New York. Some estimates put the total number of protesters between 10 and 15 million. It is still considered to be the largest protest event in history. It was a new testament to the power of the internet in bringing people together. In the days and weeks after, anti-war pressure continued. Hundreds of thousands of Americans participated in a political flash mob from their homes.
Thousands of people opposed to war against Iraq bombarded the Senate and the White House with phone calls, faxes, and emails. They called it a virtual march on the Capitol. Communications were virtually paralyzed in the Senate for a while.
They managed to jam the Capitol's phone system with over 1 million calls and faxes. These demonstrations, at a scale no one had ever seen, were impossible to ignore. But in the end, they did not stop the war.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
On March 20th, 2003, the invasion began.
This is what it's like on the receiving end.
A year later, there were more than 130,000 American troops on the ground in Iraq, and thousands more preparing to ship out.
"9/11 happened when I was in high school, and I had already decided I wanted to join the military. I enlisted in 2004 and got to a Stryker unit in Fort Lewis, Washington.
3 years after he watched the Twin Towers fall on TV, Alex Horton reported to Fort Lewis to train and meet the experienced soldiers from his infantry unit.
The guys were coming back from their first deployment to Iraq. You could see how the war had affected them. They were all thin. You could see the bags under their eyes. They were happy to be home and relieved, but, the drinking and like the partying and the remnants of PTSD were starting to bubble to the surface.
Horton and the new recruits trained alongside these combat veterans, getting ready to deploy to Iraq.
We got a reality check really fast. All the new guys in the unit that were literally green. We were wearing our green camouflage, and they came back in their desert uniforms.
Come on, guys! Go!
I got a ton of questions from people from my high school class, family members asking what I was doing to prepare. Was I scared? What's it like getting ready?
Lock and load.
There was a whole lot of engaged people thinking about Iraq and thinking about what the military was doing overseas. I just answered so many emails and so many questions about it that I just started my own blog to put it all in one place. The blog was just called Army of Dude.
In Army of Dude's humble beginnings, it wasn't all that serious.
The absurdities of military life, especially training for something like this, crept in here and there, and I just wanted a place to tell funny stories that I thought were amusing about just like how oddball stuff happens while you're in an infantry unit.
Most of Horton's early posts showed the reality of preparing for war on a military base. It wasn't all guns and ammo. There was a lot of cleaning floors, a lot of criticism leveled at Army bureaucracy, and a fair amount of goofing around.
I pray to God that we don't roll over.
This new site called YouTube had come out in 2005, which made it possible for Horton to link videos to his blog, like this one of his buddies singing a Queen cover in an armored vehicle.
Driving circles. Driving circles. Driving circles. I think I've seen this tree before.
In 2006, we deployed. We first served in Mosul. It became something different once we started getting into firefights and going on to missions, and we were doing like the no shit thing. It got really grim really fast when civilians die and soldiers die, and you're sort of caught up in this larger civil war that you don't understand, that no one in your unit prepares you for the complexities of what we walked into. We would go on patrol or we'd go on raids, and we would come back sometimes for just a couple hours, and you would go to the internet facility on base. I would come back from a mission and I would write about stuff that happened.
What Horton and other military bloggers like him were doing during the Iraq and Afghan wars was unprecedented. In every other war, only the press could report on what was happening, and only if they were given proper access. Now, any soldier could blog about his or her experiences firsthand and post pictures and videos that take the reader to the front lines. This is Horton reading one of his blog posts.
It was only going to be a routine patrol beginning in the early morning and ending around 2 p.m.
There's John, sleeping still.
Just past dawn, our company was convoying down a road preparing to get out and start our foot patrol. The all too familiar sound of a bomb hitting a Stryker filled the ears, minds, and hearts of everyone behind the lead vehicle. I saw lots of things exploding and impacting in the intersection down there, so I looked for a rooftop where a bad guy would most likely hide. Victor shot a grenade, sending it into the intersection. I launched another, impacting the roof I targeted. I didn't consider it then, but I later wondered if there was anybody on that rooftop, good or bad. Iraqi police went into the house Victor and I shot with grenades and claimed there were about 17 dead insurgents with weapons, which is likely an outright fabrication. So much for routine. I was writing about stuff that had happened, whether it's responding to scenes of devastation or soldiers getting killed, or in the end, how ridiculous some of the mission was. Blogs, I could write it and post it instantly. Like, if you didn't know anyone who was doing it, then you just didn't know what was happening. I wanted people to understand what had happened. Early on, it was just my family, and it ended up finding an audience of its own. I don't know how. I kept on getting emails from strangers who said, I've never heard a soldier, in their own words, say, this is what it's like. This is the first time someone who's like pulling the trigger, kicking the door, is describing what they saw.
In 2007, as Horton was making his way through Iraq, public sentiment on the war was souring in America. No weapons of mass destruction had been found. Over 1 million Iraqis had been killed, and almost 4,000 American troops had died.
There was this total censorship and this deep, unsettling aversion to what was going on, like led by the government.
There was a standing ban on news coverage and photography of the military coffins returning home, a ban the Bush administration refused to lift.
Do you support the policy of not allowing reporters and photographers to shoot these pictures at Dover or elsewhere?
I think the troops on the front lines want people to understand what kind of sacrifices they're making, how difficult this is for them and for their families. And part of the sacrifice that our troops make in Afghanistan and Iraq is that some of them die.
We first served in Mosul for about 5 months, moved down to Baghdad for the surge, and then spent another 5 months in Diyala, which is where we really earned a paycheck.
AG!
That was the toughest fight. A soldier, Brian Chevalier, in my platoon was killed in our first day in Diyala province, really the first few hours. It was a hard day, and we fought all day trying to find the guys who did it. When we got back to the tent, it was completely quiet. Everyone's covered in dirt, some guys covered with blood. Several guys were injured very seriously. No one said anything. I remember feeling so eerie about it. I'm like, that was the craziest thing that's ever happened in my life, bar none, and no one's talking about it. That first day was just the first day. We went back out the next day and just grinding it out, getting into firefights, just running into all kinds of stuff. Soldiers on the base kept on dying like almost every day. Brian Chevalier, Chev, we called him, his memorial service where, we had offered a few words to talk about him. That was the first moment anyone was emotional about it. And everyone was just like sobbing because we were holding in for like almost a week. Writing about it and explaining it to other people meant that I could release that energy somewhere.
A few months later, in September of 2007, Horton's unit completed their mission and returned to the United States. Horton arrived home in Texas to the realization that he wasn't alone in blogging the war. Hundreds of soldiers had done the same. Together, they had contributed a raw and powerful narrative of the harsh reality overseas. But still, the war showed no signs of stopping.
There was so much interest, but so little action on doing anything, except sending more people and increasing the body count of Americans coming back without limbs or PTSD or dead. Congress wasn't doing anything about it. It was just a runaway freight train that no one could stop.
The ongoing war in Iraq underscored the importance of elections. A few years prior, George W. Bush had won a consequential re-election over Democratic candidate John Kerry. But things could have looked very different if an unlikely dark horse candidate had managed to win the Democratic nomination instead.
What I want to know is what in the world so many Democrats are doing supporting the president's unilateral intervention in Iraq.
Back in 2003, around the time the war in Iraq began, Howard Dean, the governor of Vermont, announced his bid for the presidency.
This campaign is about changing the Democratic Party. It's about changing America.
Howard Dean was running for president. He was opposed to the war in Iraq. And most importantly, he just seemed like somebody who was giving it to you straight.
I'm tired of being divided. I don't want to listen to the fundamentalist preachers anymore.
To have somebody who was out there who you felt like you could trust was a really exciting thing.
Stand up for America! Stand up for America! Stand up for America!
Joe Rosebars was one of the handful of young staffers who joined Howard Dean's campaign in 2003.
Good afternoon, Dean for America.
As a matter of fact, I was too. I'd started working for Dean in high school when he was governor of Vermont, and I'd even built his first website. Dean was an insurgent candidate, a guy no one gave much of a chance. He was being heavily out-fundraised, but he had a secret weapon, a team of young people who knew how to use the internet.
I didn't have any sense of how a campaign worked. I think a lot of us didn't. It was, here's the challenge. With the tools we have in front of us right now, what can we do to get these things done?
You're streaming live from here. Okay, where am I blogging?
At the time, the challenge was monumental, to get an insurgent candidate elected on grassroots support and fundraising. The tools were still rudimentary, email lists and blogs. While Bill Wasik was using email to form flash mobs in New York, the Dean campaign was using Meetup.com, one of the first real social networks, to get people out to his events. And as fly-by-night as it all was, it was actually working.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States, Howard
Dean. In 2003, Dean raised an astonishing $40 million, nearly all of which came from individual donations. He was the first Democrat to opt out of federal funds, relying entirely on grassroots support, and many of those donations had come in online. It was a democratic revolution that changed the face of politics in America, powered almost entirely by the internet. Despite all of the momentum and excitement, Dean ended up coming in third in the Iowa caucuses. But that night, Dean was undeterred.
If you had told us 1 year ago that we were going to come in third in Iowa, we would have given anything for that.
And that's when something happened that none of us on the campaign could have predicted.
Not only are we going to New Hampshire, Tom Harkin, we're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. And we're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Ah!
If you've never heard this speech before, you might be thinking, the guy got excited. He screamed like a cowboy. So what? You have no idea.
Dean's concession speech was a little manic and unpresidential, to say the least.
Some people are characterizing the Dean speech as bizarre, weird, otherworldly.
The next day, the Dean scream was the talk of every major news outlet in America.
The governor has been the butt of jokes. His adversaries have tried to take advantage of the moment to suggest that he's an angry man.
Governor Dean is known as someone who might be a little bit angry, a little bit out of control, and that performance played right into it.
It was a portrait of an angry candidate, and it was a little bizarre, I thought.
All of the entertainment talk shows will be talking about it in their monologue.
It's like manna for like Jay Leno, right?
Now I hear the cows in Iowa are afraid of getting mad Dean disease.
On the late night shows, the beating continued.
America's got Howard Dean fever!
At the Dean campaign, we were just stunned at how much traction it got.
The media played it nearly 700 times in just a few days.
And then the Dean Scream took the internet by storm. There were remixes of Dean and Lil Jon.
Missouri, New Mexico, Delaware.
There were videos of Dean back-to-back with screaming goats. YouTube didn't even exist yet, but the Dean Scream was one of the first political memes to go viral. Today, if you ask someone about Howard Dean, they won't remember his promising insurgent campaign and its inspired use of the internet for grassroots organizing. All most people remember, if they remember anything at all, is that scream. The internet giveth, and the internet taketh away. After Iowa, the writing was on the wall for the Dean campaign. The scream had been the nail in the coffin.
I may not be the nominee, but I can tell you this. For the next 100 days, I'll be doing everything that I can to make sure that John Kerry and John Edwards take this country back for the people who built it.
Many on the campaign, like Joe Roastbars, were left wondering if they could have done better.
A lot of people really liked Howard Dean and what he was about. The amount of enthusiasm, genuine grassroots enthusiasm, was so poorly served by the organization. The takeaway for me was, I want to make sure that never happens again. When there's somebody with a twinkle in their eye about something, how can you recognize that and have an organization serve that?
You have the power to make it happen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
The night Dean gave his speech at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, there was another guy there with a twinkle in his eye. A young, little-known senator from Illinois named Barack Obama.
It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs. The hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores.
I was on the floor of the convention when he gave his big speech that made his name.
The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too. Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope.
I remember talking to friends on the floor being like, wow, that was something. But I didn't think much else of it. Fast forward to 2006, I'm passing through my mother's house on Long Island, and she has a postcard on her fridge of Barack Obama. I just remember being taken aback because she wasn't very political, wasn't even too much of a Democrat, really. I said, what's up with that? And she said, I don't know, I like that guy. And she had a little twinkle in her eye. Okay. If this guy really has that possibility of giving a whole lot of people a twinkle in their eye, like, goddamn if the organization isn't gonna make the most of that.
Not long after that, Roastbars signed on to be Obama's director of new media. Obama's chances were slim. Hillary Clinton had all but sewed up the nomination before the race even began. Roastbars started to plan how best to maximize the internet to build grassroots support.
I remember at the time, my then girlfriend and I would watch American Idol.
You have to decide who you think is the best. This is American Idol.
American Idol felt like WWE entertainment, like sort of scripted, sort of industry driven, but with this grassroots component of you call in and you vote, or you send in text messages to vote.
You want to vote for Elliot? 1-866-IDOLS-10, 1-866.
This sort of gray-haired guy who I guess was just inside the age window where you're allowed to be on American Idol, Taylor Hicks, was up there and being goofy.
Do you know way down upon the...
This guy who obviously the producers and the judges didn't particularly rate.
This is a guy who should be singing backgrounds, not in the spotlight.
But he would always get a big crowd reaction and had this sort of quirky grassroots following. You go online and there were Yahoo groups, there were blogs, there were people posting in forums about this guy.
Roast bars could see that Taylor Hicks fans, who called themselves the Soul Patrol, were using every internet tool at their disposal to spread the word and get out the vote. Hicks's rise through the rounds of American Idol coincided with the rise of social media. Fans were posting about him on Facebook, which would grow to about 12 million users by the end of that year. And as Taylor Hicks sang his way through round after round, the Soul Patrol was growing.
If you want to vote for Taylor, 1-866-IDOLS-12.
Soul Patrol, do it, baby, Soul Patrol! Woo!
This guy who they obviously didn't want to win the show was like crushing the voting every week.
The voter turnout for that American Idol final was staggering.
An incredible 63.4 million votes came in. That's more than any president in the history of our country. The winner is Taylor Hicks!
It was very clear that there were people organizing on behalf of the insurgent American Idol candidate and figuring out a way to find each other and making sure they participated in the process in the ways that mattered to affect the outcome. And that felt like it rhymed with our work in politics. We would have to go build a big grassroots campaign in order to compete. The road to that went through the internet.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
The Obama campaign had a sharp uphill battle ahead. Hillary Clinton was already the presumptive nominee and was getting all of the mainstream media coverage. Roast bars had no choice but to turn to Obama supporters and the internet to get out the message.
What we discovered was that if you give people the tools to stand up and fight for what they believe in, people will take you up on that.
With its website, the Obama campaign built its own social network. All across the country, people could find supporters and events in their area. They could organize their own events and get people to show up. And they could blog about what they were doing for a constantly growing audience of supporters.
I think a big part of the campaign was that it wasn't just about him, it was about us. The success of this campaign would rely on your involvement.
By the beginning of 2007, almost half of Americans reported using a broadband connection. That summer, Apple released the first iPhone, which began to revolutionize how we use the internet. YouTube made it easy for anyone to upload a video, and you could share all of it with your friends on social media at the click of a button. The era of self-generated content was hitting new highs, and people could get involved in the election like never before.
A big thing that we did was to solicit people's stories.
My name is Victor.
My name is Deborah Fordham.
My name is Steve Wilmarth. What I'm most passionate about, really, the war in Iraq and universal health care.
Change is about doing something that is needed, and Senator Obama is someone who will do that.
It's been dubbed the YouTube election, using the internet to mobilize support and transmit the message.
The Obama campaign has figured out that by putting his message out on the internet, his supporters will spread it for them.
By the 2008 primaries, Obama had used the internet to build a massive grassroots organization that was only getting bigger. Infrastructure that could have taken decades to build came together in about a year.
Thank you.
Our staff would hit the ground in a place like Colorado, and our groups were already on the ground and had organized themselves based on collaboration with people remotely at headquarters.
Thank you.
Our staff were able to come in and just sort of plug in the Christmas lights that were already strung up everywhere.
From coast to coast, from sea to shining sea, yes, we can. Thank you, New Hampshire. Thank you.
Obama's campaign had managed to harness the individual voices of the blogging world, couple them with the spontaneous real-world turnout of a flash mob, and enhance both with the force multiplier of nascent social media. At the time, it felt like he was overcoming incredible odds. But looking back, knowing what we know about the power of the internet, what happened next seems almost inevitable.
Hello, Chicago.
Obama secured the nomination and went on to win the presidency in a historic landslide.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
Obama winning was one of the few moments that we've had where it felt like millions of people gave money and time to a collective endeavor, and it amounted to something.
In this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
In terms of what it means for democracy, it made it feel like we had one.
While we breathe, we hope. And where we are met with cynicism and doubt, and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America.
President Obama kept his promise to withdraw American troops from Iraq. On August 19, 2010, the last combat unit pulled out. It was a Stryker armored vehicle brigade, just like the one Alex Horton had served with. With the end of the war on the horizon, Obama set about trying to restore connections between the United States and the Muslim world.
I know there has been controversy about the promotion of democracy in recent years.
In a speech in Cairo in 2009, he expressed his desire to see the region fight for democracy.
I do have an unyielding belief that all people yearn for certain things. The ability to speak your mind and have a say in how you are governed. These are not just American ideas, they are human rights. And that is why we will support them everywhere.
Less than 2 years later, the same internet that had brought about a political revolution in America would drive one across the Middle East.
Opposition activists organized the march on Facebook.
They have come in their hundreds of thousands.
That's on the next episode of Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet. Long Shadow is a production of Longlead, distributed by PRX. The show is produced and co-written by Ryan Swikert. John Patrick Pullen is our story editor and executive producer. Emily Barone is Longlead's managing editor. Kevin Shepard and Ula Kulpa served as associate producers. Additional editorial support by Ula Kulpa. Audience development by Jensen Rubenstein. Fact-checking by Will DeGravio. Claire Mullen did the mix. Sound design by Claire Mullen and Ryan Swikert. John Singh handles publicity for Longlead. The Podglomerate provides publicity, marketing, and promotional support for the show. Music by Epidemic Sound and Marmoset. Cover art by Longlead's creative director, Sarah Rogers. Learn more about Longlead and subscribe to our newsletter at longlead.com. Episode transcripts and more are available at longshadowpodcast.com. If you're enjoying the show, spread the word and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find the show. I'm Garrett Graff, and thanks for listening.